You are looking for a suitable business account, no matter if you are just starting out or have been self-employed for a while and are simply not completely satisfied with your current business account, then you have, I would say, many options to choose from. When comparing business accounts on the internet, there is an almost overwhelming variety of opportunities, offers, options, choices, and selections. In the past few months, I have looked at many providers and ultimately decided on FINOM, and I thought I would just make a very brief video about it and introduce you to FINOM. So let's take a closer look at the FINOM business account. We'll examine the features, what makes FINOM special, what the advantages are, what the potential disadvantages are, what prices there are, and so on. You can find all the information below in the video description under the first link. I would suggest we switch directly to the screen and take a closer look. First of all, to the question of what FINOM actually is. FINOM is a business account, a purely digital business account. This means that in essence, FINOM does not have its own branch network, but is purely operated via smartphone or through the browser version. But FINOM is not just a bank account. It is specifically designed for businesses and self-employed individuals. You can also see this when you click on products. It is for sole proprietorships, startups, freelancers, GmbHs, KGs, OHGs, UGs, GBRs, and AGs. Almost all legal forms find the right package at FINOM. And because they focus solely on business customers, they have many features that a traditional bank does not have, such as invoicing, accounting automation, and so on. We will take another look at those shortly. Important at FINOM is that FINOM actually has its own German banking license. This means that while FINOM is not very old, it has been around for about 5 years, since 2019, but it is indeed a fully fledged bank. And a fully fledged bank means you actually have your IBAN with FINOM, and you are, for example, also secured by the German deposit insurance. This means that just because FINOM is young, it does not mean it is in any way less reputable, because many banking providers, that is, other banking providers, are actually not banks at all. They only build the interface and behind it another bank operates. With FINOM you have everything from a single source, and you especially notice this when you deal with support, as the support can help you with all your problems. With other providers, you often have the problem that someone else is always to blame, because one company issued the card, another company builds the app, and another company is the account holding institution, and somehow someone else is always at fault, which is super frustrating when dealing with support. You don't have any of these problems with FINOM, because with FINOM you really have everything from a single source. And now let's take a look at the features of FINOM that ultimately led me to choose FINOM. Because FINOM is much more than just a bank account. These additional features save a tremendous amount of time in financial management and ultimately in accounting, and they actually replace some accounting functions. That's why I find FINOM so incredibly exciting. You can find the packages on the website under prices. You can immediately see that there is the category for sole proprietorships, SMEs, and even corporations. If we just click on it, we see that there are 3 different packages for individual businesses, and that you can actually start with FINOM for €0. This means that if you are just starting out and your budget is not very large and your needs are not very extensive, if you just need a bank account where you can write the IBAN on your invoice and where you can pay your invoice, then you can start for free and grow with FINOM until you eventually become a huge company and then of course have many features, but also pay $250 a month for your bank account. As I said, 2021, it's clearly more than just a bank account. These prices aren't for sole proprietorships, but you could grow large with FINOM at some point. This means you have 15 users, 15 employees who have FINOM cards, and they would then have unlimited virtual credit cards that can be linked to online tools, and up to 3 physical credit cards. This means you actually get quite a lot here, indeed. But let's take a look especially at the features that are relevant for sole proprietorships, and honestly for me as well. The feature I probably use the most is simply the ability to pay with Apple and Google Pay, because I honestly don't need a physical credit card. Rather, I need a virtual card that I can store in my Apple Wallet. And then, yes, when I go shopping in a store, I usually pay with my smartphone, and you can take a look at all the features. There is really a good comparison matrix, and there are incredibly many features. In this video, I want to focus on some specific features. And one very interesting feature is actually the ability to create invoices with FINOM. For that, let's switch to my account. This is what the FINOM interface looks like, which means you have the most important information at a glance here. On the left, you can see all your accounts listed along with your total account balance, and then you see the transactions, meaning what bank account movements have actually occurred in your business account. What I find so interesting and wanted to show you is found up here under Documents. And here under Documents, you have a complete portal to manage the invoices and other related documents. So your own invoices that you create can be written here under New Invoices, which we will look at shortly, but also invoices that you receive. I often find that when I receive a paper invoice, I regularly forget it. You can actually just upload it here, and then I can directly make a payment from it. So it recognizes the receipt, reads the receipt, and essentially creates a payment suggestion from it. Where I find this really exciting is that employees can also simply upload documents here, and I can sit down once a week and then approve my payments. So I just have to execute them. Don't have to do anything else. I can manage all my incoming invoices well through here. Those who regularly watch videos on my channel, they know that the e-invoicing obligation starts in 2025. That means in the future, paper invoices will be a thing of the past, and then the whole topic of invoicing will become much nicer because invoices can be read directly, and FINOM is actually already aware of this. What I am indeed actually planning to do in the future is to have all my invoices sent directly to FINOM. That means if someone sends me an e-invoice in the future, I want to have it immediately here in FINOM directly from my service providers and suppliers. So far, I have honestly just dragged and dropped everything in here, but down here on the left, you can see there is an email address, and I can give this email address to my service providers, and they will then send me the invoices directly to my bank account. From this, a payment proposal is automatically created, and I just have to approve the payments via my smartphone. This is really a perfect workflow. Small practical note. Here you can see this email address, which I must admit I don't find very nice. I would prefer an email address that corresponds to my domain. And to be honest, I simply set up a forwarding. That means I created an email address with my domain, which is then called accounting or invoice, and then my domain, and I simply forward this email address to that email address. And my clients don't even know which email address is behind it, and ultimately don't know that I'm using FINOM unless they watch this video. They just send their invoices to my accounting email address, and I receive it here in FINOM. And this is certainly the most relaxed, smoothest workflow one can have for financial management. However, in this context, we should consider the invoicing function, because there are not only incoming invoices that need to be paid, but the account also needs to be filled. And for that, invoices must be written. And many of you do this with either an accounting program or with software such as Word and Excel. And with Word and Excel, it will be a bit difficult starting next year because there is this e-invoicing obligation. That means you need an invoicing tool for 2021, and a professional invoicing tool is indeed FINOM. This means you can actually create your e-invoices with FINOM in the future, actually. There, you simply click on Invoice at the top left, and then you see a very typical interface for creating an invoice. This means you can create contacts here and then simply select them. You can enter your invoice number here, invoice date, due date, currency, describe the service, etc. Then you can preview the whole thing again, you can change some colors, etc. And then you can send it via email to your customers from FINOM, thus fulfilling the e-invoicing obligation, and of course you already have the invoice in FINOM. And as soon as the customer pays, the invoice is marked, settled, and thus you have a bit of accounts receivable management actually included in FINOM. And to be honest, those are relatively many functions that you would otherwise always need an accounting program for. FINOM, you don't need all of that. And now in practice, you often have a problem, namely when you don't just have one bank account, but you might have 2 or 3 bank accounts and the money comes in here and there. How do you keep a reasonable overview? And something very interesting comes into play here, because FINOM is not just a bank account, but more of a financial management app. I think that describes it much better. You can actually connect other bank accounts to FINOM easily. If you think the interface of FINOM is actually quite nice, and the whole functionality around it is really pleasant, why doesn't it look so nice at other banks? And I would like to have this feature elsewhere as well. And you can actually go to settings on the left side on the home page and simply connect your bank. This means if you have another bank account somewhere else, at Sparkasse, Volksbank, Postbank, etc., then you can easily connect everything here, and then you have an overall overview. This is especially interesting when you want to check if your bills have been paid, or if you simply want to get an overview of how much money you have in total with just one glance and one login. As I said, I mostly use it via a smartphone because you are not only interested in one bank account, but in your entire financial situation. What was additionally an interesting feature for me personally was the management of employees, or generally when you start a team like a partnership, or if you have a GmbH with several employees and they should all have cards. But of course the managing director should perhaps have a larger budget than the simple employee who is responsible for office management. And then you can invite your employees, that is your team. Here under team, And then you can simply invite employees there and give them certain rights or budgets. What you can also see is accounting. This means I can now invite my accountant. This makes sense, especially when, of course, at some point a bookkeeping from the bank account transactions should lead to a profit and loss statement or a balance sheet for my GmbH. Then these bank account transactions and the invoices written here must somehow be integrated into accounting software. And this integration is, of course, available. I personally use FINOM in combination with Lexware Office, and in my experience, it works flawlessly. Have never had any problems with it so far. And at this point, an important limitation for me personally with a digital business model is that FINOM is honestly the perfect bank. But if you deal a lot with cash in your self-employment, meaning you have cash income and many cash expenses, then a purely digital bank account is probably not the right choice for you, simply because you likely need a bank where you can go, where you can withdraw money, where you can deposit money, and so on. And purely digital providers like, for example, FINOM are usually not suitable for that. Of course, these are not all the functions. Indeed, these were the functions that stood out to me and eventually led me to choose FINOM in the end. It may be that other functions are more important to you than they are to me. That's why I would say just take a look at it. I find the whole thing very clear and very detailed in terms of pricing. Feel free to check it out, and if you have looked at it or are a customer, I would also be very happy to hear about your experiences in the comments section. Now, let's get to the question. How much does it all cost? And as I mentioned before, you can start completely for free. This is especially convenient for those who are just starting out, who want to keep costs low at first and still do not want to handle everything with a personal account, which I would also strongly advise against. Please get any account, even if it can do little more at the beginning than just deposit and withdraw money. It is incredibly valuable for your accounting to very carefully separate private and business finances, and here you can already start with zero. Then there is a plan that I honestly also use, the starter plan. It costs $7 with annual payment and $9 if you pay monthly. And then there is indeed what I would call the largest plan for sole proprietorships, which costs $24, the annual payment, or $28 per month. And as I said, you can grow with Fino for a long time, so until you have 15 employees who all need their own credit cards, by then you usually already have 50 employees. Maybe to put it in context, in terms of pricing, if I compare business accounts, I would say FINOM is in the affordable mid-range. If I only consider the bank account, if I consider all the additional features like writing invoices, document storage, and so on, then I have to say that FINOM is more of a great bargain. At this point, a small note again, because I know that this question often comes up in this context: how much does it actually cost to withdraw cash at the ATM? It always costs a little bit. It is tiered based on the amount of withdrawals and the plan you have chosen. So the more expensive the plan, the more cash you can withdraw for free. As I already said, if your business model is very cash intensive, then you are probably better off with a local bank anyway, perhaps indeed. But it's not like you wouldn't be able to access cash if you have the FINOM bank account. And personally, I don't think I've ever paid for cash at FINOM because I simply don't withdraw anymore, and smaller amounts just included for me. And while I would like to pay for everything with a card, greetings to all the restaurants in Berlin, sometimes that just doesn't work. And then I just go to the ATM with the FINOM card, get the cash, and pay in cash. That works in my plan without any extra charge. Before we get to the conclusion, two very important points once again. What is important for a bank account? First, security, and second, how quickly can I actually reach support if something goes wrong? And regarding security, I have already mentioned that it is a German bank account, so it is a German bank with a German IBAN and German deposit insurance. This essentially means that the state covers bank deposits up to a certain amount in case something happens with FINOM. Admittedly, this happens very rarely, but it is of course important to know that with the FINOM bank account, you have basically all the securities you would have with a normal German bank. Then everything is of course GDPR compliant. You have secure two-factor authentication and so on. And the archiving of invoices is also taken care of. This means that everything is also GoBD compliant. The invoices are also in the bank interface, and of course they are kept there for 10 years. What if there are problems or you have questions? Then you can contact FINOM via email, phone, or chat. I must honestly say I almost always use the chat. I usually have it on my smartphone, and when I have a question, I chat there briefly, and I almost always get a response within 5, at most 10 minutes. Of course, not every problem is always solved immediately, because sometimes it requires follow-up questions and a bit of back and forth, but they are basically there right away. And I find this incredibly important, especially with digital banks, because you can't just walk into a branch and meet a person to ask questions. Therefore, accessibility must also be high, and you can certainly test that. So if you try out FINOM, just write to support once, and then you will see how quickly they respond. My personal preference is to use the chat, as I find it the most convenient. Let's move on to the conclusion and also discuss the pros and cons. A huge advantage for me is the usability, meaning the way everything is structured both in the browser version, but even more so in the smartphone app, and also the account opening process. In my opinion, it can hardly be built better and more intuitively. And that's why I'm also happy that I can manage my German bank account through FINO, because it has this multi-banking feature. Additionally, the account opening is fast. This is crucial when founding a corporation, because a corporation can only be registered in the commercial register once it can be proven that the share capital has been paid in. And the worst that can happen is that you get an in-person account opening appointment after weeks. In my case, the FINOM account was opened within hours, so I had an IBAN, I could deposit the share capital, and it was immediately available due to the real-time transfer. Then I could immediately and quickly obtain a bank statement, send it to the notary, and she could then register it in the commercial register. Overall, this is probably the fastest way to definitely establish a GmbH or a UG in Germany. What I also find nice for sole proprietorships, now that I've talked a bit about GmbHs, is that you can start for free. Really, for those who are doing something small on the side, urgently, get a bank account, feel free to get a free bank account. And that's the nice thing about FINOM, you can start for free. That's why it's definitely my recommendation. And then, for freelancers, the integration into accounting systems is incredibly important. First of all, you don't need any integration for invoicing because you have the invoice directly in FINOM. I also mentioned that I do my accounting with Lexware Office, and the integration works perfectly smoothly. However, there are various other integrations, and you can send the bank account transactions to the tax advisor in a DATEV format. That means even if you have a tax advisor, the tax advisor receives these bank account transactions directly in the correct format. And in my opinion, that rounds off the offer very, very well. But there are no providers in this world that only have advantages. There are always disadvantages as well. I have already mentioned one disadvantage. If you have a cash-intensive business, you should rather choose a branch bank and not a digital bank. That means you are simply out. The whole cash handling just doesn't work particularly well with purely digital banks. And then there's another point that personally didn't bother me, but I've heard it from friends and colleagues who also use it a lot. Namely, there is no overdraft facility. If you actually need an overdraft line for your account, unfortunately FINOM cannot offer that. And if you urgently need it, that might also be the reason why you can't use FINOM. And that is a problem I actually had very regularly. The cards you receive are debit cards. They are not real credit cards, which in today's world of 2024 hardly interests anyone anymore, except for car rental companies for the deposit. At car rental companies, the car rental agencies often want a real credit card, and with FINOM you only get a debit card. In most cases, that is the much better system, but some providers insist on a real credit card. This is how I solved it for myself. There are pure credit card providers that simply withdraw the money regularly from the bank account, and I just have a provider for a credit card, and this credit card is simply reloaded monthly from my FINOM account, and that's how I solved it. Simply use the debit cards from FINOM for all my everyday expenses. But if I ever need a credit card, which in my case is really just the deposit at car rental companies, then I have a separate credit card for that, and this credit card withdraws from my FINOM account. That means, while this is a disadvantage of FINOM, it hasn't been a reason for me personally not to use FINOM. In conclusion, and to summarize, I must say that FINOM is honestly the nearly perfect business account for me personally. I am very, very happy with it, and if you have looked into it as well, if you have experiences, then feel free to let me know in the comments. Especially for the other viewers, it is also incredibly interesting to perhaps get a second, third or fourth perspective. And with that, we have also reached the end of the video. Feel free to click on the first link in the video description or directly here, or just check out one of the other videos on this channel, for example, this one or this one.